heard the David Bowie song Life on Mars a lot on the radio, but people didn't panic, and life went on. Ted Peters, a theologian, he's done a lot of, again, opinion polls, and one of the things that you hear about the discovery of extraterrestrial life is that it might undermine people's religious beliefs. His research actually suggested that the opposite would be the case. And when he followed up this with one-on-one discussions with the people who had been polled, they said, well, if we find more life, it just shows that God's creation was even bigger and more wonderful than perhaps we even realized. What I thought was quite funny was that he interviewed Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Jews, many different religions, and all of these people tended to say, well, I wouldn't have a problem with it, but maybe some of the other religious denominations would find it difficult. So I don't know whether that says maybe things about people's religious beliefs and their perceptions of other religions. But it's interesting that, again, the Vatican, of course, has its own observatory. Some of the people involved in this have made some very provocative and interesting speculative remarks about this. And I think this is a very healthy situation. Catherine Denning, an anthropologist, gave an example from the early 20th century when one of the last members of a lost Indian tribe walked out of the wilderness and became quite well known, was interviewed by anthropologists, and she gave the example, this was Ishi. She gave the example of an occasion where Ishi was asked a simple factual question about his family background. He responded to the question with a 5-hour speech about a bird, because he spoke in stories and analogies. So Catherine Denning, speculating about encountering extraterrestrials, or perhaps picking up a signal, said, if we do manage to decipher a signal, perhaps it will be a story that will tell us everything we need to know, but yet it will be a story we can never understand. So this was a very interesting 2 days. I was privileged to sit through it. I thought it was very interesting that scientists from so many denominations, so many disciplines, had come together to exchange ideas. As Lord Martin Rees said, it wasn't a UFO conference, but it dealt with effectively a subject that overlaps this. And I think it is a very interesting sign of the times in which we live that the Royal Society feels comfortable with putting on a discussion meeting like that, and the proceedings will be available later this year, I think, from the Royal Society themselves. So again, I say they didn't openly advertise this to the public, but it's not a secret, and I would recommend this to you. I think that these two things are related. The Royal Society is now prepared to discuss the possibilities, the serious possibilities of extraterrestrial life. NASA came, the European Space Agency came, the United Nations came. On the UFO phenomenon, the British government is declassifying and releasing its files. Many other governments around the world are doing the same thing. Perhaps when one government releases its files, it puts more pressure on other governments that have not yet done so to release their files, like a line of dominoes falling. So the Royal Society hold a conference, the Ministry of Defence release its files, and when this is, I think, the point on which I will conclude by saying that a couple of years ago we were in a different world. The Royal Society could not have put on this conference, I think. And the media, certainly in Britain, regarded the UFO subject as a fringe subject. But when the Ministry of Defence released their files, when all these journalists suddenly stopped and thought, wait a minute, this is not somebody coming back from a bar late at night. This is a pilot. This is a military officer. And when they could see these files for themselves, in Britain, what we saw was that suddenly there was more coverage of the UFO phenomenon in the mainstream media, the Times, the BBC. So there was more coverage, but also this coverage was more serious. Yes, of course, you will still get the odd joke about the X-Files, and I make those jokes myself. But the world, I think, has changed, and the release of these files has shown that, again, whatever you think about UFOs, whether you are a skeptic or a believer, there is enough material in the Ministry of Defence files to show that this is an interesting subject, and it is one that I think is worthy of serious scientific study. Because after all, these questions, whether you believe in the extraterrestrial hypothesis or not, we are pushing the barriers of science, and if there's even the slightest chance that this is something truly exotic, then I think we should be looking at this. And after all, what question could be more profound than to ask, are we alone in the universe or not? Muchas gracias.